thank you, Patrick, and thank you all. My name is Andrew Walsh. I teach in the Anthropology department here. I'll talk a bit about what Camps Media Institute. It's the island that's often not pictured in the map of Africa, Madagascar. But I'll start by saying something about this 17th partnership, Partnerships for the Goal, this Sustainable Development Goal. I thought when asked to do this, I thought I know something about partnerships, and I thought I knew something about the Sustainable Development Goals. What I realized is looking at this online and all of the different, here's the most meta of the goals, in that it's actually references the goals in the goal itself. And then you've got these 17 different targets. They all have these different targets, which is interesting to advance this. And one that made I thought I could speak most effectively to, was this 17.17, encouraging effective partnerships. Now, like Henri, I'm so glad you did it first, because this is such a classic sort of professorial thing to do, which is, especially when thinking about big ideas like this that are widely promoted, is to kind of break down what does the language mean. And one of the things I was wondering about, as Henri was, in sort of thinking about the ones included in Goal 4, is, well, what do we mean by partnership? And what is intended here by partnership? And in this case, what is intended by effective? What does it mean to say a partnership is effective? I'm going to go out, I don't think on too much of a limb, and say I think the assumption is that an effective partnership is a productive partnership. In this case, it's a partnership that somehow leads those involved closer to the achievement of, not this goal, because this goal is, as I said, quite different, but these other goals, these other 16 goals, towards social justice, towards ending hunger, towards these things. The problem is, and I can't help being from the discipline I'm in and from the social sciences, and one of the things you'll always hear anthropologists or others in the social sciences say is that these often, something like a partnership is fundamentally about social relationships and complicated social relationships. And as being something that is ultimately about complicated social relationships, it's never as simple as we envision it to be when we start out. The terrible truth is that partnerships involve people, and as we love to say in anthropology, people are complicated. And because people are complicated, those partnerships, to be effective, they don't always work. They don't always work. Now, the point I'd like to stress here is that I think to be effective, we have to think about partnerships as fundamentally being sustainable. We talk about sustainable development, but we also have to think about sustainable partnerships. For partnerships to be effective, they have to last. This is, again, I'm speaking from personal experience. Let me tell you what I mean by that with reference to my own work. There I have to show a bit of Madagascar. So, as I say, I've been working since the early 90s in northern Madagascar. I've done long-term ethnographic research there, originally on topics that had nothing to do with development, but topics that actually put me in the heart of communities where I learned a lot about what it means to be living in northern Madagascar in the time, late 20th century, and now since early 21st century, I go back often. And since I got my secure job here at Western, I wanted to establish partnerships. So back in 2005, I got the ball rolling, and with my colleague Ian Cahoon and colleagues in Madagascar, especially Alex Tukumaro, we started with a partnership, an education partnership. So here we're referring back to Goal 4, which, as you clearly, is all connected. And that is one where we have sought to work with colleagues and students at this partner university. We actually created a partnership agreement to engage in a sort of a responsible, reciprocal exchange of students' research and ideas. This has involved bringing Western students to Madagascar, where we work with Malagasy students there. But it's also involved bringing Malagasy students from this partner institution back to Western. And actually, an interesting thing to Gregor's point, in 2016, we had a group of 6 students here, and just to see what would happen, we flipped the script a little by having these visiting Malagasy students participate in a class where one of their tasks was to do a form of service learning in the community in London. The idea being that, well, what would they make of this, working alongside Canadian students in London, in this case working with the Community Engaged Learning Office, going out and in this case working some of them with the London Middlesex Immigration Partnership on coming up with things. And I can talk more about that later if you're interested, because what they came up with was actually, or their reactions to this was very different, I think, than what we tend to find when our Western students go and work with community organizations in Madagascar. The simple answer is they listened a lot, and they paid attention, and they did not assume that they could solve this organization's problems. In fact, they assumed that they knew the least about this organization's problems, and that what they could contribute was actually very modest, which is actually a very accurate way to approach it. But this project has also ended up involving collaborating with and partnering up with community organizations, including this one, which I'll mention because they're up and running in case you ever want to go to Madagascar. It's an organization called COFAMA, which is a small community-based conservation and ecotourism project, where somewhat similar maybe to the case you're describing. In Madagascar, as you know, is a biodiversity hotspot. It does attract ecotourists. This region is a particularly popular one. And this was a community organization that saw this as an opportunity with the help originally of some Peace Corps volunteers, tried to set up a camp where they could host backpackers and ecotourists. This is actually us in 2010. The project started with them in 2008. And this is us last year in 2017, keeping up with it. Now in both cases, it's now been 10 years that these partnerships have been ongoing. So I feel like I have something maybe I could say about how to sustain effective partnerships. The problem is that depending on how you define effective, these partnerships have not always been effective. In fact, they've been complicated, as I said before, in the way that partnerships always are. They haven't always worked. Most importantly, maybe, they haven't always produced the things we thought they were going to produce. And in some ways, that has been kind of disappointing. And for me, there have been many times when I wonder, what have we accomplished here? What have we actually done? Now, I'll give you an example. A low point maybe in this came in 2013 when I visited that same site. It doesn't look like this now, but after a coup in Madagascar, there was a drop in tourist numbers, and that project that in 2008 seemed so promising, by 2010 was still, on the verge of becoming something. By 2013, it had fallen apart completely. No tourists had come. It seemed to be a disaster. And sitting in a community near there where the office of this organization was based, I was kind of lamenting, oh God, what have we done? We did all this work, we were working with you, we did all kinds of research to make this, and we actually really accomplished a lot. But in the end, this project was a failure. Of course, this also led me sitting around talking to people. And I realized as I was going around this village, kind of feeling kind of down about this whole thing, everyone was saying, oh, where is so-and-so, where is this student, where is that student, what happened to those Malagasy students we were visiting, and they had great memories, and we had done homestays in this community over 2 different trips. And clearly, they did not think of this project as a failure. They saw it as a success. And the reason they saw it as a success is because it succeeded in doing what many, if not most, Malagasy partnerships do, which is to create a partnership. Actually, it's the relationship that mattered to them, much more than what was or wasn't accomplished by it. And that I had come back and could bring them news of these students who they had brought into their houses, and some of them they had named kids after them, and I could then bring that news back to those students. This to them was a sign that there was nothing wrong with this partnership. In fact, it was working very well. I say all this in part if I've learned one thing, because in fact, since that project, actually the research that we've been doing over the last 3 years has been focusing specifically on partnerships in Madagascar, very small scale partnerships where people coming from different backgrounds are coming together and trying to do something good together. Sometimes it works. More often, it seems it doesn't. Now, one of the things I have noticed through this research, and it's still pretty preliminary, but I feel confident enough to say it here, is that partnerships that start out with the assumption of some entering the partnership, that this partnership is ultimately going to end with me leaving and handing things over to you, are partnerships that generally are fated to maybe not fail, but certainly not go in the directions that people assume are. In Madagascar, you enter a partnership, you enter a relationship with the assumption that it's going to keep going. I've resisted till now bringing up the idea of envisioning partnerships among people and their own spouses, boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever. Imagine entering such a partnership and going in with the knowledge and being quite upfront with the person you're entering it with and saying, by the way, my ultimate goal is to leave. How would that partnership go? So this is to say that sustaining these partnerships for us, and I think sustaining partnerships more generally, requires really attending to the partnership itself and not simply to the goals. And that is actually much more work than you can imagine. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole and Patrick, for this opportunity. So my name is Saverio Stranges. For those of you who know me, I'm the chair of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at Shuri. So my background is in public health medicine and in global health, chronic disease epidemiology. And my talk overlaps with many of the goals, although I've been asked to talk about partnership. And I want to try to convey to you that the health issues and the changing scenario that we are observing in Africa cannot just be tackled with a biomedical approach. And actually, if we follow a pure biomedical approach, we are likely to fail. And so I will convey the idea that obviously we know that some of you are also from Africa, that we obviously in Africa there is a rapidly changing scenario in terms of the kind of disease conditions people are experiencing. We talk in terms of multiple burden of disease because the usual idea around Africa is malnutrition, infectious disease, HIV, but obviously things are changing in a very dramatic and rapid fashion, also because of changing in the underlying, if you like, social and political determinants of disease, and also lifestyle habits, for example, in those settings. So you may know this concept of the epidemiological transition is applied to, in particular, to sub-Saharan Africa. Most of my research is in the area of cardiovascular epidemiology, and you see that with the changing social condition, like increasing level of acculturation, urbanization, and affluence, I think that was also a point made by Gregor, you're seeing that some of the usual Western diseases are becoming very common in Africa as well. For example, if you look at hypertension, high blood pressure, you know that the African continent already has the highest prevalence around the world. And still the public health attention to those chronic conditions is still quite limited because obviously there is a conflict in terms of resource allocations because malnutrition, HIV, and other infectious disease are still primary causes of concern, but you see there is also this overlapping burden from chronic disease, and this will continue and will likely exacerbate in the next few decades. And again, these calls for, if you like, multi-sector, multi-sectoral initiatives because obviously if people are changing their diet, if they are changing their physical activity patterns, if you like, if they are becoming more sedentary, although these changes are not homogeneous across different population supergroups, but they are happening in Africa, and this obviously will translate in in those kind of, if you like, side effects of westernization. I think someone was making the point that happiness, for example, in Africa. So I hope that they will not lose, and this again will not apply only to Africa, but to other populations, perhaps where the socioeconomic conditions are relatively limited, but that sense of fulfillment that comes not just from material things, I'm concerned that they may change in the near future. So, and I'll give you some examples of research we have done. I just joined Western last year, so some research I've done is mostly from my previous experience at the University of Warwick in England, where I was part of a research network to boost capacity in non-communicable disease, chronic disease in sub-Saharan Africa. So we will go to many African countries on a regular basis and trying to engage other scholars and see how can we make a contribution to the capacity in doing research in chronic disease in settings where the traditional concern has been around infectious disease, around malnutrition, around HIV. And there was this concept of primordial prevention in relation to chronic disease in Africa, hoping that they will not experience the same, if you like, side effects of westernization, but I'm afraid that that is already a missed opportunity. So there are things that we have done, for example, around some chronic condition. Sleep problems, for example, are becoming a huge problem in terms of risk factors for chronic, because sleep problems are associated with a range of chronic conditions. And this was a WHO in-depth initiative. In-depth is a wide network across Africa and Asia trying to collect information on chronic disease risk factors, again, in settings where the primary or traditional concern was around HIV or infectious disease. Hypertension is a huge problem. This was a study we did in South Africa, where basically we show that the prevalence of high blood pressure is very high, even higher in women. But another important observation is that there is a large geographic variations, for example, in the prevalence of these chronic conditions in Africa, because there is heterogeneity in the social determinants of this condition. And this is important, obviously, in the context of limited resources, because you can specifically target those regions where the problem seems to be more severe. And the same applies also to...
Isn't that the wine district? You would expect less hypertension in the wine district.
This is the wine district?
Isn't it?
Not sure. We explained that with, but we can talk about this, otherwise we will continue to talk about for 2 hours around potential reasons for that. Or the issue of obesity and overweight. I mean, this is an increasing problem in Africa. Seems strange because the idea is always about malnutrition. If you look, for example, in Nigeria, there are already 20% of women with overweight and obesity, and some of the states, I think, is around Cross River, which is also a touristic area. So you may speculate that in those, besides urbanization, and obviously you will find more obesity in Lagos or in the capital district, but you can speculate this is a touristic area, that perhaps the dietary patterns are changing, there is a kind of increasing westernization. So epidemiology gives the opportunity to flag some hotspots in such a wide and heterogeneous context such as in Africa. I think I've finished with, and I will learn a lot from my students. In Warwick, for whatever reason, there was a selection bias in students coming to me, mostly from African countries. So I have learned a great deal from them. So again, there are lessons to be learned also from the students.